It's another in my 5 cool albums released X amount of years ago this week. Let's get into it. Hey, I'm Michael Douglas. Welcome back to Dr. Pundit, where we talk about music, not medicine. And I've got 5 new albums. Well, they're not new, they're 45 years old, but a new list of 5 albums that I think were very good albums, a couple excellent albums, released 45 years ago this month in 1980 when I was just about to turn 12 years old. Let's get into it. You know, things were changing fast in the music world in 1980. Genres were popping out of nowhere. And while even established types of styles were being inundated by new acts who took matters into their own hands and plowed in new directions, in August of that year, 1980, many artists and bands delivered unforgettable albums that were brand new to record stores. And these 5 albums, I think, stand out from that period in time. The first, One Trick Pony by Paul Simon. Now, I know I'm speaking to a certain audience here, and that certainly isn't 12 to 15-year-olds. I'm speaking to people who probably weren't into Paul Simon when he put out this album in 1980. But as we grow older, musical tastes mature, we find out about back catalogs, and some of this stuff I think is relevant to talk about, especially in my age cohort. And I'm guessing that, again, most people really don't know about this album, much less the movie upon which it was based and which it came from and which he starred, that inspired Paul Simon to write the songs for this record. But he delivered a few tracks that stand out in his totally estimable catalog, I guess. Late in the Evening, a track which hit number 5 that year, came from this album, was a big hit, and a very rhythmically propulsive album that I think Paul Simon delivered up to that point. And although the title track, One Trick Pony, isn't too far behind, elsewhere on this album he delivers some bittersweet reflections with a track called How the Heart Approaches What It Yearns, and Long, Long Day. The latter one is a very good listen as well. Now, the movie was a flop, but I think the soundtrack album, the album upon which the movie was based, totally deserves a listen, especially if you like Simon and Garfunkel, especially if your idea of Paul Simon goes to Graceland in 1986 and the track You Can Call Me Al. Next, Panorama by the Cars. Excellent album. Doesn't matter, there were no big hits on this album, which is why this is the album that casual Cars fans know of the least. And there's something unapologetically brooding about the material here, which might be why the album Panorama didn't get a lot of love initially out of the gate. The best stuff here powers on through the relentless robotic grooves, as you'll hear on tracks like Up and Down and Don't Tell Me No. And the track You Wear Those Eyes combines some quirky lyrics with one of Ric Ocasek's, the late Ric Ocasek's, trendiest tunes, and I think tenderest tunes on this album. And I'm here to argue that the Cars were never better on the classic Touch and Go. That's a song you may have heard in the background on Cars documentaries or retrospectives about the band, because this is the album that broke them through to the decade of the 1980s, but some would argue that this is the one that took them out of that primarily punk part and put them into the pop lane going into the 1980s. And I think the guitar solo in the song, primo, done by a guy named Elliot Easton in the band. Most people, and speaking of casual fans, have heard of the 90125 album, the one that gave us Owner of a Lonely Heart. Well, what about the album Drama? Now, that album came out in August of 1980. That album I like to refer to as the personnel shifting album for the band, because you kind of needed a scorecard to tell all the players on any given Yes album, but this album really took that to an extreme. The last minute, 11th hour edition of Trevor Horn and Jeff Downs from the group The Buggles might lead some people to consider this more of a new wave type direction in the band. But, on the contrary, I think this album really delivers from the progressive rock lane. As a matter of fact, it really celebrates it if you really listen closely to the album. Ironically enough, that fealty to the past likely doomed the record from a commercial standpoint. Again, 3 years before 90125 and Owner of a Lonely Heart. But there's no denying that the shape-shifting tracks on this album deliver on tracks like Tempest Fugit and Machine Messiah. And Trevor Horn, I think, does his best to kind of shape John Anderson's helium voice style in this album. I'm not being disrespectful when I say it. That's just, it's part of the whole phenotype, the DNA of the band, yes, at that point in August of 1980. Now, this was also the year, I guess the month, that I first heard of the band B-52s. I had a couple of schoolmates who were really into this band, and they took, I think they were ahead of their time, really kind of predating the British invasion for a couple of years before that took place, with their kind of new wavy approach before new wave was a thing. And the similarity of this album, released in August of 1980, an album called Wild Planet, the similarity of this album to their debut wasn't indicative of the band being stagnant in any way. It wasn't indicative of them playing it safe, trying to find their audience before they would blow up a few years later. They just had a lot of material lying around that they didn't really use the first time with their debut album. And you tend to forget how hard this band could really rock, and they did, as the guitar of Ricky Wilson really drives the music on this album. And as always, the vocal give and take between Fred Schneider, okay, the lead singer, and the smooth tones of Kate Pearson and Cindy Wilson on the album carries a lot of the load as well. And the songs all live up to the killer titles. Songs like Private Idaho, awesome. Devil in My Car, another great track, and Quiche Lorraine. Finally, this one I think is my favorite on the list because this artist was really about to blow up. Pat Benatar released her classic Crimes of Passion. Now, her 1979 debut a year earlier introduced her as a singer who could establish her identity even amidst the clatter of punchy rock and roll. Now, a year later on one of the best albums of 1980, Crimes of Passion, she basically put her stamp on a series of smash singles that, although she didn't write a few of them, all became hers. Unmistakably Pat Benatar. Hit Me With Your Best Shot became an anthem of resilience. Another one of those I like to call number 9 songs like Journey's Don't Stop Believin' that should have been a number 1 hit. Everybody knows that song decades on. Even if they think that Pat Benatar is a one-hit wonder, that was the hit. I like to kind of tell them about, okay, Love is a Battlefield from her live album a few years later, 3 years later. But that's another time. Another track on the album, Treat Me Right, just a great song. You know, that song really, I just think, cemented her niche as a female rocker with a lot of broad appeal. And the tightness of the new wave grooves keeps everything very catchy on this album. So, you know, listeners wouldn't be afraid to like this album because it's that good. And this album also, I think, showed her excellent taste in cover music, handling both the brassiness of You Better Run and the tenderness of Wuthering Heights' Kate Bush. Pat Benatar's Crimes of Passion. That goes along with Panorama by the Cars, Wild Planet by the B-52s, Drama by Yes, and One Trick Pony by Paul Simon. 5 great albums coming out this month, 45 years ago when I was about to start the 7th grade. There you have it. I'm Michael Douglas. If you like what you see here on the channel, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late great Barry White used to say, let the music play. And I'll see you on the next episode.